My name is Sloane. Wait, let me start over. My name is Tara. No. I need to check the list first before I write a single character name because the rules here matter. Let me verify which names are off limits and pick fresh ones silently. My name is Callan Mercer, and the moment my life cracked open happened on a Tuesday afternoon in my parents' kitchen, over a pot of coffee I'd driven 4 hours to bring them. I was 22, still in school. Still believing that if I showed up enough, if I tried hard enough, eventually I'd feel like I belonged in that house. My mother was sitting at the table, and her best friend, a woman who wore too much perfume and too little empathy, was sitting across from her. I came in through the side door the way I always did, the way kids do, when a house is technically theirs, but never quite feels like it. I heard my name before I even set down the coffee. That's Callan, my mother said. She went one hand toward me, the other wrapped around her mug. She's the complicated one. We've had to manage her since she was born. Her friend made a soft, sympathetic sound, like someone had just described a chronic illness. I stood in the doorway holding a bag of groceries, a $12 pound of their favorite coffee, and the specific look of someone who has just realized the room they grew up in was never actually safe. My mother looked up at me then, no apology in her eyes, just mild surprise that I'd heard. "You can put those on the counter," she said. I put them on the counter. I didn't say a word. I drove home 4 hours and cried for the first 2 of them, then stopped, because I realized something. I had used half a tank of gas to go feel small in the house where I'd learned to feel small. That was the last time. Before I tell you what happened 7 years later when they showed up needing something from me, tell me in the comments. What time is it where you are, and what state or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story gets. 7 years is a long time. Long enough to become unrecognizable to the people who thought they knew exactly what you'd amount to. I'm 29 now. I live in a mid-sized city in North Carolina, in an apartment that took me 3 years to afford comfortably and another year to actually like. I work in medical billing compliance, which sounds boring, and I understand that, but what it actually means is that I sit inside the machinery of hospital finance, and I find the errors. Missing codes, incorrect modifiers, claims submitted wrong and costing facilities tens of thousands of dollars. I find the gaps and I close them. I'm good at it. I started as a data entry specialist at a medical billing company right after I graduated, learned the compliance side on my own time, got certified, switched firms twice, and eventually landed at a regional health system where I now manage a team of 6 people and report directly to a director who once told me, in her flat, efficient way, that I had saved the department more money than any hire they'd made in 5 years. I don't say that to brag. I say it because for a long time, the voice in my head that measured my worth sounded a lot like my mother's. Complicated, a lot to manage. And I had to learn, slowly, and with help, to replace it with evidence. The evidence was, I built something. Quietly, without applause, and mostly without anyone from my family noticing. My mother had a way of describing me to people that made me sound like a weather system she'd had to endure. High maintenance, sensitive, difficult. These are the words that follow certain daughters around like a fog, not because they're accurate, but because naming something difficult lets you off the hook for how you treated it. My older sister was the one they talked about at the dinner table. Her career, her husband, their new house, the baby they were trying for. I understood from a very young age that she was the one they'd been hoping for, and I was the one they'd gotten alongside her. I don't think they meant to make it obvious. I think they just didn't bother to hide it. When I was a senior in high school, I found out that my parents had set up a savings account in my name, as part of what they called our education plan. I found out because my mother mentioned it once, casually, as evidence that they'd been thoughtful and fair. But when I started looking into college financial aid and the counselor asked about assets in my name, I checked. The account had been opened. It had also been quietly emptied. 3 withdrawals over 2 years, the largest one right before my sister's wedding. I asked my mother about it once. She said it was a family decision. She said money moves around. She said I should focus on my future instead of the past. I did focus on my future, just not the one they imagined for me. I applied for every grant I could find. I took out loans in the amounts I absolutely had to. I worked at a grocery store 22 hours a week during the school year and 35 hours during summers. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in health information management, and exactly one piece of advice from my father delivered at my graduation dinner: don't expect this to take you anywhere special. He meant it kindly, I think. Or he meant to mean it kindly. But it landed the way it landed. I moved to North Carolina 3 weeks later. I told them I'd call when I was settled. I never really called. They never really pushed. We reached a mutual quiet that I think we both decided to call a relationship, because the alternative was admitting it wasn't one. For 7 years, I was the daughter who lived out of state and didn't come home for Christmas. I was the one who sent a card for birthdays and a text on holidays. I was the one they described at family gatherings. I can only assume as going through a thing, or being difficult, or the one who was always complicated. I made a life out of the quiet. I found a therapist named Dr. Okonkwo in my second year in North Carolina, who told me something in our third session that I've carried ever since. Estrangement isn't always a door slamming. Sometimes it's just a door that stops being opened, and both people have to choose not to notice. I noticed. I just also chose. The first sign that something was shifting came as an email. It landed in my personal inbox on a Wednesday morning while I was eating yogurt and reading through a compliance audit report. The subject line was just my full name. No greeting, no context, just Callan Mercer, like a label on a file. The email was from my mother. She'd found me, she said, through my company's website. She said she needed to talk. She said it was important. She left a phone number I didn't recognize, which meant they'd changed it since I'd last had it saved, which told me something about how much they'd thought about reaching me in the years between. I stared at the email long enough for my yogurt to go warm. Then I closed the tab and went back to the audit. That night, a voicemail appeared on my cell. My father's voice, older than I remembered it, with a roughness around the edges like sandpaper over wood. Callan. I know things have been, he paused, distant, but something's come up. We need your help. Please call us. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it to a folder on my phone labeled admin, same folder where I keep receipts I might need, and insurance documents I hope I won't. I filed my father's voice next to my dental records and tried to sleep. 3 days later, my doorbell rang at 7 in the evening on a Thursday. I was still in my work clothes, eating leftover soup at the kitchen counter, reviewing a training document I was supposed to finalize by Friday. The bell rang once. Then again and again, the way people ring it when they are afraid that if they stop you'll disappear. I set down my spoon. I walked to the door the way you walk towards something you've been half expecting and fully dreading. Mom. Dad. The people standing in my hallway were older. My mother had always been put together in a way that felt deliberate and slightly aggressive. And she still was, but the effort was more visible now, the way maintenance becomes visible on older buildings. My father had shrunk somehow. Not physically, but in the way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that it shows in how he stands. They looked at my apartment the way people look at a place they expected to be worse. Hi, I said. I didn't move to hug them. They didn't move toward me. Callan, my mother started. You look well, my father said in the same breath. I looked at them for a moment. What do you need? My mother's jaw tightened slightly, the way it always did when she felt she deserved a warmer welcome than she was getting. Can we come in? Every part of me that had spent 7 years building a life where I set the terms wanted to say no. But I was also 30 minutes from a conversation I had spent a long time imagining, and I wanted it to happen where I had home field advantage. 10 minutes, I said, and you sit where I tell you to. They sat at my kitchen table. My mother's eyes moved over the apartment with the specific efficiency of a woman cataloging whether or not her child had succeeded despite her predictions. My father's eyes went to his hands. I stood across from them with my arms crossed and waited. My mother started. She'd always been the one who started things. She told me they were in trouble. The house where I grew up, the house they'd been in for 31 years, had been remortgaged twice. There was a second lien. My father's business had contracted sharply after he lost 2 long-term contracts in the same quarter, and they'd borrowed against the equity to stay afloat. But the payments had become unmanageable. The bank had been calling. If things didn't change, they were looking at foreclosure. I listened. Then I said, "What does this have to do with me?" My father looked up from his hands. "Your sister can't help. She and her husband are extended already. They've got the baby now." They've got their own mortgage. He gestured at the apartment, at what he imagined the apartment represented. You've done well. You're stable, you're not carrying debt. We need someone to co-sign a restructuring loan, someone the bank will accept. And you thought of me, I said. We thought of you, he confirmed. Yes, the audacity of it sat on the table between us like something solid. I want to make sure I understand this, I said slowly. You'd like me, the complicated one, the one you've had to manage since birth, to attach my credit, my name, my financial future, to a debt you accumulated after 7 years of silence. After you emptied an account that was in my name to pay for my sister's wedding, and whatever else you decided was more important than my education fund. My mother started to speak. I've seen the withdrawals, I said. I've had the records for years, I'm not guessing. She went quiet. My father exhaled. We thought you weren't going to use it. You'd talked about taking a gap year. You were uncertain. We thought the money would sit there. So you took it without asking me. It was a family decision. It keeps being a family decision, I said, until it's my problem to fix. Then suddenly I'm the solution. A silence settled over the table. Outside, a car passed. Someone in the unit above mine was moving furniture. You want to know what it cost me, I said, to leave. To start over on nothing, not a loan from you, not a safety net, nothing. Callan, my father said. I worked a grocery store checkout line to afford my first semester's textbooks. I ate instant oatmeal for 3 months in a row because it was what I could buy in bulk. I took out loans I'm still paying, not because there was no money set aside for me, but because that money was used for someone else, and you didn't tell me until it was too late to make different choices. My mother's eyes had filled. Callan, we know we hurt you. We were doing what we thought was best for the family. But I was the family, I said. I was also the family. And for a long time, it didn't feel like it. She wiped her eyes. I didn't feel particularly moved. I'd imagined this scene many times. In the versions I imagined, her tears did more to me. In the actual room, I mostly felt tired. Here's what I'm willing to do, I said. I'm not going to tell you to leave. I'm also not going to sign anything tonight. Before we talk about banks and loans and futures, I want you to know what the last 7 years actually looked like from where I was standing. No interrupting. No, it was complicated, or we did our best. Just listening. My father nodded. My mother pressed her lips together and nodded. So I told them. I told them about the first winter when I was too proud to ask anyone for help, and too broke to turn the heat up past 62 degrees. I told them about the performance review, where my first director told me I had potential, but needed to speak up more, and how I'd spent my whole childhood being told that I was too much to manage, and then arrived in the professional world not knowing how to take up space. I told them about the therapy I'd started at 24 because I kept ending up in situations where I let people take more from me than they were entitled to, and having to learn, at not quite 30, how to recognize my own worth without someone else assigning it. I told them about the savings account. Not to punish them, I'd made peace with that money a long time ago. I told them because they had never once, in 7 years, acknowledged it, and I needed to hear whether they'd acknowledge it now. My mother was quiet for a long time after I stopped. Then she said, I thought the distance meant you were okay. I told myself the distance meant you were fine. That's easier than the alternative, I said. Yes, she said, it is. My father didn't say anything, he just looked at the table, and for the first time he looked genuinely ashamed, not embarrassed, not defensive, but ashamed. There's a difference, and I've spent enough time learning to read people to know it when I see it. After they left, I called my best friend, a woman named Odette who has known me since our 2nd year of college and who shows up for emergencies with practical questions and very good snacks. She arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of sparkling water, a container of hummus, and her laptop. Okay, she said, sitting cross-legged on my couch. What do we actually know? I walked her through everything, the email, the voicemail, the visit, the request. She listened the way she always listens, with her chin in her hand and her eyes tracking like she's building a spreadsheet in real time. So they want you to co-sign a restructuring loan, she said when I finished, for a property that's been double leveraged and is likely underwater. Essentially, she tilted her head. What do you want, Callan? Not what you think the right answer is. What do you actually want out of this? The question landed somewhere in the center of my chest. I thought about the girl who drove 4 hours to bring her parents coffee, and heard herself described as complicated before she'd even set the bag down. I thought about 7 years of building something solid out of materials I'd had to source entirely on my own. I thought about the account in my name that had been emptied while I was busy being uncertain about gap years. I want them to understand that choices have weight, I said. I want them to sit inside the consequences of theirs without me cushioning it. I don't want them to suffer. I just don't want to absorb the impact anymore. Odette nodded slowly. Then before you go any further with this, she paused. Have you talked to your sister? I hadn't. My sister and I had been polite with each other for years, in the way of people who share a history but have agreed without discussing it to leave most of that history alone. We exchanged birthday texts. We had occasional phone calls that felt like diplomatic summits. She had never brought up the money, and neither had I. I found her number and called her that same night. She picked up on the third ring, sounding surprised. I told her what had happened. I told her about the visit, the loan request, what I knew about the savings account. There was a long silence on her end. I didn't know about the savings account, she said finally. I swear I didn't know it was yours. I believe you, I said. That's not why I'm calling, she exhaled. They asked me to help too. I told them we couldn't, and I told them, she hesitated. I told them that before they asked you, they owed you an honest conversation, that you deserved to know why they made the choices they did. I didn't expect that. I sat with it for a moment. Did they tell you, I asked, that they think of me as the complicated one, that they've described me that way to people for as long as I can remember? Another silence. Then, Mom called you that once, in front of me, when we were teenagers. I told her it wasn't fair. She said I didn't understand the full picture. I didn't know you'd said that. I should have said it louder, she said quietly. We talked for an hour, not about the loan, about the years between, the things that had been named wrong, the pattern that neither of us had fully had words for until we were old enough to step back and see the shape of it. By the end, we weren't exactly close in the way sisters in movies are close. But we were honest. That was something we hadn't been before. The bank meeting was scheduled for the following week. I showed up in my best blazer, the one I wear for compliance presentations, with a folder of printed documents that I'd organized the night before while Odette sat on my couch and asked me if I was sure about this. I'm sure, I said. My parents were already in the conference room when I arrived. The loan officer, a man named Mr. O.C., with a careful suit and the manner of someone who has seen a great many family meetings go sideways, gestured for me to sit. He walked through the numbers first. The balance on the restructuring loan, the current arrears, what co-signing would mean for my credit profile and liability exposure if a default occurred. My mother watched me across the table the whole time. My father looked at the loan officer. When Mr. O.C. turned to me and said, Mercer, are you prepared to take on joint legal responsibility for this loan? The room got very quiet. I opened my folder. Before I answer, I said, I want to make sure there's accurate context on the table. I slid a copy of the savings account records across to him. When I was 18, there was an account in my name earmarked for education. Over the course of 2 years, it was emptied in 3 withdrawals. I wasn't told. I found out years later when I was already in debt that could have been avoided if that money had been used as intended. Mr. O.C. scanned the documents. He said nothing, but he also didn't look away. This isn't to assign blame in front of you, I said. It's context for why I'm not in a position to act as a cosigner based on shared trust alone. Because the trust has a documented history of not being honored. My mother made a sharp sound. Callan, you're making us look. I'm making you look like the record shows, I said. That's different. Mr. O.C. set the papers down. Ms. Mercer, he said, I want to be clear that my job here is to make sure you understand the full risk of what you'd be signing. Given what you've shared, I'd be professionally obligated to advise any client in your position to exercise significant caution. My father turned to me. Callan, please, we're your parents. We made mistakes. But you'd really let us lose the house? I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about what Dr. Okonkwo had said to me once. The question isn't whether you love them. You probably do. The question is whether love requires you to be the thing that catches them every time they fall. I'm not letting anything happen to you, I said. You made a series of financial decisions over many years, and they've brought you here. I didn't make those decisions. I can't be the correction for them. I'm not in a position to co-sign this loan. My mother's voice cracked. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Mr. O.C. cleared his throat. He offered my parents information on financial counseling service, options for loan modification, and a timeline for what came next if the restructuring was declined. He was efficient and kind about it, in the way of people who have delivered difficult news enough times to know that the kindness is what people remember. I walked out of that building into afternoon sun and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my folder tucked under my arm and the feeling of a door finally swinging all the way open. Not slammed. Opened. All the way. I called Odette. She picked up before the first ring finished. What happened? I didn't sign, I said. A beat. Are you okay? I'm okay, I said. I think I'm actually okay. There is an epilogue to this story because there always is. The house was sold 8 months later, at auction, for less than what was owed. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the town where they'd lived for 30 years, which meant facing the neighbors they'd hosted dinner parties for, the church friends they'd impressed for decades, the social geography they'd built their identity on. I know from my sister, who has maintained more contact with them than I have, that it was hard, that my mother cried for weeks, that my father started seeing a financial counselor and then, quietly, a therapist. I didn't go to them during that time. That wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Their rebuilding was theirs to do, and my presence, loaded as it was with everything that had happened between us, would not have helped them do it any faster or any better. What I did do, I took the money I would have spent as a cosigner's liability exposure, money I had put into a contingency savings account when the bank meeting was first scheduled, just in case, and I donated it to a scholarship fund at the community college in my county. It's specifically for first-generation students in health information or medical billing programs, students who want the same career path I found and who might not have a financial safety net to fall back on. I named the fund myself. I called it the Full Picture Scholarship because that's what I'd learned to demand. The full picture. Not the curated version. Not the one that describes you as the complicated one and leaves it there. The version that includes what you went through, what it cost, what you built on the other side of it. At the first award ceremony, I sat in the back of a fluorescent-lit community college conference room and watched a 20-year-old woman accept the first check. She was nervous and a little underdressed, and she said, "Thank you" 4 times in a 30-second speech. I recognized her completely. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was 22 in that kitchen doorway, holding grocery bags I'd bought with my own money for parents who were mid-conversation about how hard I'd been to raise. Being the complicated one, the difficult one, the one who needed managing, that was never a verdict. It was a defense mechanism that belonged to them, not a fact about you. You are allowed to refuse the label. You are allowed to stop carrying the weight of someone else's guilt dressed up as your character flaw. You are allowed to let people sit inside the consequences of their own choices. That is not coldness. That is the beginning of honesty. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments. What's one thing someone said about you when you were young that you had to spend years unlearning? Your answer might be the thing someone else needs to read today. I'll leave you with this. The night after the bank meeting, I sat in my apartment eating the same leftover soup I'd abandoned when they rang my doorbell. It was past 10. The city outside was doing its city thing, indifferent and ongoing. And for the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, the voice in my head that said I was complicated, that I was a lot, that I had always been too much trouble, that voice was quiet. Not gone, maybe, but quiet. And quiet, I've learned, is somewhere to start.